Shukran. If Dr. Boyce, if you sit at the front so that you can see the slides.
Great.
Yes, yeah. And then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for joining this session. So we're part of this. Thank you. We're part of this Beating the Heat, Accelerating Access to Sustainable Climate Solutions in Cities. I'm Elizabeth Wangeshi Shege, Energy Efficiency and Cooling Specialist at Sustainable Energy for All, Country Focal Point Kenya and the region. I also volunteer at the World Green Building Council as a board member. We'll start off with a presentation from Mr. Anthony Pierce, co-lead WWF Cities, to make his presentation. Following that, our speakers will come to the panel seats. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. It's really good to be here today. And we've just had a very interesting hour or so about the importance of dealing with heat in cities. And from a WWF point of view especially, we heard from our energy lead, Manuel, about the importance of cities that WWF thinks, and I think also the importance of compact, well-functioning cities and how essential they are to really a solution to climate change and to overcoming the challenges of biodiversity loss. So we really need to make sure that cities are a solution and not, as I heard yesterday, a few mayors call them, they could be death traps if they're not done well. So it's really something that needs to be done well. We need to invest in them. We need to make sure they work for people. We know how fast urban populations are growing, and we know that 90% of urbanisation in the next 4 decades will occur in Asia and Africa. Urbanisation itself creates several impacts which continue to push climate change on the one hand, but natural surfaces absorb radiation, they release water vapour and cooling the surrounding air. Where am I? Oh, there we go. Okay, yes. But when these natural areas are replaced with buildings and roads, the urban heat island effect is generated due to the absorption of radiation, which is then released as heat. I don't think I need to tell everybody this. We all know how it works. It's pretty obvious. But over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen several urban greening projects that have demonstrated the impact of nature-based solutions. We thought we'd just give a couple of examples of these. Oh no, that's the wrong way. There, okay. Right. Because we saw the need for this with the group that are cooperating with this Nature for Cool Cities Challenge. We need to encourage cities and to help cities, particularly cities in the Global South, coordinate, adopt and find the financing for these sorts of solutions. So we as a group decided to come together and start this Nature for Cool Cities Challenge, which will be launched tomorrow. One of the examples you see here is in Madrid, which is a great example of local urban nature projects, where the city promotes productive neighbourhood projects involving local inhabitants, which aim to reduce the carbon footprint through introducing 0 kilometre food projects, the renovation of schoolyards, modifying city regulations for climate comfort and adaptation through green roofs and walls in policy regulations. In particular, they have a program called Producing Neighbourhoods, which is to activate the revegetation of poorly preserved free spaces, as well as the creation of green roofs in neighbourhoods of the most vulnerable outskirts of Madrid. We've seen just from the studies that have been done on this project that there are a great array of social benefits. That includes healthy locally sourced food, as well as improving the employability through training of the population in sectors such as agriculture, gardening, nutrition, health and food, and also empowering women. The environmental benefits are also important because of the reduction of transport due to some of the food being locally grown, the greening of urban areas, increasing biodiversity, as well as improving the aesthetic value of the area. We've also seen air quality be improved, and of course the reduction in the urban heat island effect due to it. Another example that also goes to demonstrate the proof of the pudding in this case is in Medellin, Colombia. They've taken a more structural approach to this, where they've created green corridors, which are areas thick with vegetation along 18 roads and 12 waterways throughout the city. Their aim has been to create a more beautiful city, increasing biodiversity while tackling the urban heat island effect, it's such a hard word to say, and reducing air pollution. They've seen here that temperatures have fallen by 4 degrees Celsius in some places, and they expect even bigger reductions in the future. The city's botanical gardens are involved in this and training people as gardeners and planting technicians. And these are really giving a boost in employability to people from disadvantaged backgrounds, which has had great socio-economic value. So why are we launching this challenge? Yes. We think the time is right for a nature-based cooling challenge. In the landscape of work on urban greening and nature-based solutions, some challenges have been documented, but they really haven't targeted the fast-growing developing countries where early action can lead to long-term climate resilience and have the most impact. What we wanted to do is to catalyse urban nature for cooling by supporting a cohort of global south cities committed to developing and implementing nature-based solutions to deliver on urban heat resilience and cooling benefits. The global objectives of the challenge are listed here. The first is to demonstrate urban nature-based solutions' ability to mitigate the urban heat island effect by avoiding emissions and reducing energy demand, by driving finance to allow for replication and upscaling, and to send a demand signal to project developers and financiers. To participate, the challenge participants, which can include municipalities, groups of municipalities or regional governments, they need to pledge to increase or enhance the proportion of high quality nature-based cooling solutions within their cities by 2030. And then to demonstrate progress on this by 2025. It involves a series of pledges as well, which challenge participants, in order to participate, they need to set a quantitative target. That can include the area or percent of nature-based solutions to increase, or a funding target, such as the amount of budgetary resources they'll spend on NBS, and at least 3 implementation targets. These can be policy, finance, or technical. The challenge partners will include financial institutions and investors, creating opportunities for cities and financiers to partner for innovative finance for implementation. And winners will also receive technical assistance for implementation and monitoring, with an emphasis on comprehensive and inclusive approaches to maximise equity and environmental benefits. Now, I was told there was an QR code here. Yes. So if you're interested, please come. There'll be a launch tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in the SDG 7 pavilion. And you can also find more details there from the QR code. Please have a look that up and spread the word, because we'll be launching tomorrow, inviting more participants soon. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you. So what you just saw was the Beat the Heat Nature for Cool Cities Challenge that's going to be launched tomorrow. So we welcome you to the SDG 7 Pavilion. Sometimes on the maps, it's SC for All Pavilion. So we'll be there at 9. I'd like to now move on to a panel discussion. I've got some expert panelists on strategies and needs for accelerating and scaling urban nature-based solutions for cooling. I'd like to invite Dr. Boaz Kedar, Head of Sustainable Planning and Energy, Municipality of Tel Aviv, Yafo, Israel. Please take a seat. Thank you. I'll also have to invite Cassie Sutherland, Managing Director, Climate Solutions and Networks, C40 Cities. I've got Paul Curry, Associate Director, Urban Systems, ICLEI Africa. We've also got Kathy Bowman McLeod, Director and Senior Vice President, Adrienne Arsht Rockefeller Foundation, Resilience Center. Thank you very much for joining us. Without taking too much time, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Boaz, because we're talking about case studies. We really need to see how we have been successful, and also living in Africa, where it was mentioned before, we have the numbers on there. We do feel the heat, and thanks to COP27, we're here. We're actually experiencing what it would look like. If you don't mind, please tell us, Tel Aviv-Yafo is among the many cities that are experiencing the impacts of rising temperatures. And thinking of how to beat the heat sustainably, how is the city leveraging nature to cool down? And what is your experience in implementation in different parts of the city? We have 2 microphones. Thank you. Please proceed to tell us about Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity. So I come from Tel Aviv Yafo, which is just about 8 hours drive north of here, if you didn't stop. It's in Israel, so you'd have to cross the border, but it's really not very far, and we are actually used to heat. We're a country with a small population, about 9 million. Tel Aviv is about 500,000 people, and it's a coastal city on the Mediterranean. I don't know if you, anyone from a Mediterranean country here, but the Mediterranean region is actually a global hotspot because of the geophysical structure of the Mediterranean. Essentially, it's like a closed bathtub. So not only do we know that the Mediterranean basin will get much hotter than the global average, we also know, like Anthony just showed in his slide of the urban heat island effect, we know that the cities along the coast will get even hotter. And we've actually been experiencing a few very hot summers. So nature-based solutions, I want to talk about 2 things, just 2 minutes. One is increasing our green infrastructure, that's trees and shade trees. The second is green roofs. There's actually a third point, which is biological pools. That's kind of a side note. So green infrastructure, we've been, the city has set itself in the deadline 2020 agreement through C40. In 2019, the mayor of Tel Aviv has agreed to increase the city's tree canopy cover by planting another 100,000 trees. We currently have just over 250,000, so from 250,000 to 350,000 in just 10 years. And we're already in our 2nd year into that commitment, and it's getting more and more difficult to find, believe it or not, to find suitable places for new plantings. We know that the underground, to be successful, a tree needs a healthy and open ground to grow, and the underground is filled with infrastructure, anything from fiber optics to sewage, and it's getting more and more difficult. Just to end with the Green Roofs initiative that we're now working on. So we're working on a local policy which will mandate any roof, first new and then existing, any roof in the city, to provide or to fill some type of ecological deficit that we've mapped. So it can be a green roof, it can be a blue roof, which is which helps with runoff management. It can be a solar roof. It could be an agricultural or social roof for any type of citizen activity. So that's it.
Thank you very much for that. That sounds fantastic. You know, living in Africa and noting that 80% of the buildings and cities that will come up by 2050 are not built yet, sounds like a fantastic lesson to learn coming to that. I'd like to move on to KP, just bring you in. Let's pass the microphone. Thank you. Ashrock is working with cities around the world to help them build strategies to strengthen heat resilience with nature. What are the success factors in tackling this challenge with nature in the cities you're working with? What is needed to scale these efforts by champion cities?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And we're very pleased that Tel Aviv-Yafo is a member of the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, so it's very nice to see you. So we know that nature-based solutions are the most cost-effective in reducing the heat and so many ecosystem benefits and services, and I think we know that, and we saw that with the prior presentation, and so I don't think we need to cover that so much. One of the biggest levers that we have is that our chief heat officers sit very close to the mayors, and so when you have the ability to influence the mayor, you have the combination of the science and the policy and the implementation teams and the analytics to assess your success, but you really can't do it without political champions. And so first success factor is that the mayor is at the top of the list of proponents for the work, the nature-based solutions work. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is that it's really important that you think about, while we're talking about nature-based solutions and planting more trees, is that the threat of heat on the trees we have now. And so 100% of Australia's trees are under threat from extreme heat. So which species of which trees planted where with how much water and how much calculation of operations and maintenance will we need to maintain the tree canopy we have or replace it because we can't save it? And we know that climate also helps insects proliferate. And so I would use a beetle that got into Athens that is eating the mulberry trees, and the mulberry trees are the shade trees, and the climate conditions are the perfect feast for these beetles. And so they're having a hard time beating back the beetle, and the trees are dying. And so we need to do both, plant them, but we also need to be really thoughtful about which trees where. And so in our partnership with the city of Athens and the prefecture of Attica, we have partnered with a group called Alchemia Nova, and we are creating a guidebook of which species where and how much water and how much shade you can expect, and then what is the necessary irrigation for the evapotranspiration that has to take place for the cooling, because you need shading and cooling, and then which financial models match those species, and then where's the supply chain for those species. And so getting really granular into the finance and risk side of the trees. And then there's so much more, but just for an opener, I'll say those are the two key factors of knowing what you're doing, but also having political champions and support at the top of your jurisdiction.
Thank you very much. That's very, very encouraging. And I think it's something that can be picked up as a low-hanging fruit around the regions as well. So I'd like to move to Cassie. C40 cities are turning to nature as a means to achieve their climate objectives, including through the Urban Nature Accelerator. Can you tell us about the ongoing efforts and how the challenge can support your efforts? Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much, Elizabeth, and thanks for having me today. I mean, I agree with my colleagues who've just gone before me of saying political leadership in cities is key to taking action on increasing climate resilience. And I think Boaz put that perfectly, saying the mayor set these targets and now we're delivering against them even when they're difficult. And, but really that sets us on a path. And so I think that is crucial. Something that we've done at C40 is we have this, leads me on nicely, see, nice segue, have this Urban Nature Accelerator, which is a leadership standard for our cities, and it really is a group of cities signing up to the highest level of ambition in a particular sector. So in the case of urban nature, we have 38 of our 97 C40 cities committed to, by 2030, having either between 30 to 40% of their area, either green or permeable space. So recognizing urban nature is important, but also sometimes the permeability is going to be the most important thing in terms of managing surface water. or the cities can commit to 70% of residents having access to green or blue space within 15 minutes of their home by 2030. And I think something that I'm sure my panelists agree with, but we haven't mentioned so much yet, is really that social aspect and the importance for people's health and well-being to have access to green space within their cities, and cities particularly as the ones are set to grow, just as you mentioned, Elizabeth. So our aim with this accelerator was really to design it to have flexibility and be able to be applicable to all different typologies of cities, but have some kind of common leadership and get the mayors excited about that, as well as sometimes have them commit to stuff that's pretty difficult. And maybe I can just give a couple of examples of cities just to add to the ones we've heard. So I think a great example to give is the work that's happening in Dhaka North in Bangladesh at the moment. Incredibly low-lying city and high risk of flooding. And in Dhaka North are also experiencing huge amounts of climate migration. Around 2,000 extra people every day coming to the city due to migrating from climate impacts in the rest of the country. And so the mayor of Dhaka North has put in place an initiative to increase urban green spaces by 70% by the end of actually this year. It's a huge increase. It will lead to around 20% of the population having access to green spaces within 15 minutes. But it's not only about that green space, it's also access to facilities, playgrounds, public toilets, really giving that infrastructure that comes with it. So I've had my 2-minute warning, but I've only used one of them. So my second minute, I'm going to use to just give an example of Freetown. Freetown has this brilliant initiative called Freetown the Tree Town, which is a super cool name to start with, but also it's super cool because the mayor of Freetown was suffering from huge amounts of landslides due to kind of deforestation and development in the city. And so set about planting 1 million trees in the coming years, and not only kind of planting them and using this to also create jobs and develop skills in the city, but also digitally tracking them. So there'd be some way of actually monitoring where they are. And I think learning from the examples that Boaz gave before of sometimes it's really hard to know where to put these trees and, where do we put them? So I think that really shows that kind of learning as we're getting a bit better at this stuff and more experienced. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think from the conversation so far, I've heard Australia, Bangladesh, Tel Aviv, Freetown. So I do believe that we are doing something, and I'd like to hear more from you, Paul. So ICLEI has been working with cities to catalyze action on nature through its cities with nature and regions with nature. In your experience, what is the motivating cities to turn to nature, and what is actually motivating cities to turn to nature? And what obstacles are cities meeting when planning for nature-based solutions? How can the challenge support these efforts as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my colleagues have added political leadership, a lot of fabulous technical detail, because we sometimes make assumptions about, oh, it's green, it must be good, So I think what I'll add in my intervention is the notion of solidarity and a shared journey. And it's wonderful to hear about multiple different platforms that are bringing people towards nature and cities. And I think we just need more of them. Excite people, as many as possible, to show off the activities that they're doing. So part of that is also an accumulation of evidence. So what Cities with Nature does, it invites cities to... Am I not... Must I be much closer? Wow. I have a loud voice normally, so... What Cities with Nature does is it invites cities to come together on a learning journey. It's a platform which has 3 main phases: analyze, act, and accelerate, broken down into a series of different types of activities. And the idea is not to follow a single path. If you are interested in policy and enabling environments, there's guidance on how to develop a local biodiversity strategy and action plan. If you're interested in showing action now because your citizens want to see action on the ground, you can start with demonstration projects. So the entry point is broad and allows you to showcase the work that you're doing. And the value of this platform is, as I said, about building solidarity and showing that this is a valuable and a valid route to go. What I really like about the Beat the Heat Nature for Cool Cities challenge is it's a double entendre, and that comes to the challenge of doing nature in cities. You have to make it cool to put nature in cities, we're aiming here, of course, to reduce heat. But the biggest challenge facing using nature-based solutions, from my perspective, is that you're competing with so many different other. Am I still coming through? You're competing with so many different other interests. In our context, in African cities, you're facing massive urbanization rates. There's a huge pressure to build new housing, industry, and so the notion of having a place that people see as just open and land is somewhat unacceptable. And so actually demonstrating that this open space serves multiple purposes, both in cooling, both in social engagement, community building, is really, really important. So if we can use it both for an endeavor to cool down cities, but also to show that parks and many other nature-based solutions are adding value, I think that would be the main point of platforms like this.
Thank you very much for that. And one thing I pick up from that, without summarizing the fantastic information that we've shared today, is you mentioned that it's not one solution. So I want to move on to the next question, and this is open to all the panelists. During this COP, we're seeing increased attention to nature-based solutions as key tools to deliver on our climate objectives. For the next COP, the UAE's presidency is considering making cooling a priority. What progress on nature-based solutions for cooling in cities would you like to see a year from now at COP28? And the second part of the question, what progress do you hope the challenge can help achieve by then? So I'm more than happy to take the first one. Maybe Kathy, thank you.
One of the things we need the most is for awareness of extreme heat. And we need to understand how deadly it is, and it's killing more people than any other climate-driven hazard. I'm kind of shouting. I realize this microphone seems a little bit low. And secondly, with that awareness of the lethal nature of heat is the link to nature-based solutions. And then we need for planners and elected officials and multilateral banks to understand the linkages and how lives can be saved through nature-based solutions. And we'll need by next year some more solid financing options and guidelines for easy access to financing, even when cities and jurisdictions don't have the access to credit that is necessary. And so that would be my vision, is that between now and then we officially brand it the cooling COP, and that we in this next 12 months understand the relationship between passive and active cooling, understand the renewables necessary to power the climate clean cooling, the mechanical side, but that we've maximized the passive cooling in urban forest and green roofs and cool roofs. And I mean, there's a whole policy set that needs to go with this. And as we saw from Sophie with the Heat Action Platform, there's a policy toolkit as a part of it that has a lot of this in there. But I think the key thing is saving lives with nature, with financing.
Thank you for that.
Kathy, thank you. You've given me a great segue. I think that in continuation to what we just heard, I think in Tel Aviv, in any case, I'm going to go out on a limb and say we don't have a financing problem. We don't have an awareness problem, but we have something we lack in all cities across the globe, and that's cooperation. We've realized in Tel Aviv, I can only speak from my own experience, that the city mechanism being so large, we have, if you look at a single tree in the street, an existing street tree, that provides shade and is healthy and everything. We have we've mapped about 7 different stakeholders just within the city that, that interact with it. So there's one department that does maintenance in terms of, I don't know what you call, how you say it in English, that you, pruning. Thank you. There's another that waters waters the tree and fertilize it and whatever. There's a third department that will cut it down if there is a permit for development or anything. So I can go on and on. I'm not even talking about the. I'm only talking about the city mechanism, not even about the civil stakeholders. So one of the things we did in Tel Aviv is we've launched an initiative called the Urban Forest, and it's actually just an organizational platform within the city to have these people sitting around one table. It's actually amazing that this never happened before, but only when they speak to each other and look in each other's eyes and realize that a lot of times their efforts are counterproductive. So in relation to your question, my hope for next year is that we learn to work. It's a cliche, but that we learn to work together and learn to cooperate towards this goal, because we need that more than ever.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Hasi?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts from me, although, I mean, wonderful reflection so far. I would really like by next year for us to see some relationship and understanding and joint approach in terms of mechanical and passive cooling, and really saying, are we treating overheating as really the crisis that it is, which cannot just be overcome by nature-based solutions, nor can it only be overcome by just increasing mechanical cooling and putting that in all of our buildings. And there's a lot of chat about that, in my opinion, but there's not much yet happening in terms of really addressing it. So I think that would be one for me. I think it's great to hear Tel Aviv doesn't have a problem with financing, but I think there's other cities that might do. I think I would like to see some financing. But I think Boaz makes a great point. It's not just the financing to get the nature-based solutions in the ground. It's the maintenance. It's the upkeep. How do we actually treat them as assets in the city, and assets that are working hard for the city, as well as kind of doing that first job when they go in the ground.
Thank you. Over to you, Paul, please.
Thanks so much. I love that. My next blog is going to be how many city departments does it take to maintain a tree? And the same point is true for food systems. How many to fix lighting in a market, to build a house? So I love the point that you've made about mapping the different responsibilities. I think what's interesting about wanting the focus of Next COP to be around cooling is this year we've seen a fabulous inclusion of food, water, waste, much more centrally. So resources all round have received much more attention here. So the next step then can be an obvious connection towards how does nature interact with each of these different resources. And so I think that link also can help to mobilize attention there. Because believe the one person responsible for food and for water and for waste is going to say, no, but we just had our spotlight, we can't yet get there. So those linkages and giving the evidence of how those linkages come together, I think, is really important. A project undertaken in Dar es Salaam was the idea of a thematic atlas, which is one of my favorite pieces of work. It was a participatory process of bringing a community together to map different natural assets around the city, and then to connect it with sensor data showing a lot of different phenomena and temperature, pollution, heat, temperature is heat, in the city, and to draw those linkages. And so one of my favorite maps is showing where your nature is in cities and where your higher temperatures are. So in a way, if we can work towards a collection of those types of thematic atli in a year, I think that would be a really great showcase of the correlations and the connections to be made. One mustn't forget that in 2 weeks, the COP15 for biodiversity will be taking place. That is another place in which we need to draw the linkages and invite that community in. If we're going to have nature for climate, they need to be there. And so I think there's some mobilization that needs to take place there as well.
Thank you. Fantastic options there and opportunities towards COP28. And it's quite funny you mentioned about the link for COP15, because if you walk over to the food pavilion, they're busy talking about how to grow food in the cities. So that cooperation, collaboration really comes into play. I'd like to open up to the audience and get some questions or comments as well, because this is a very interesting topic, and I like that you mentioned the cooling COP. I think definitely that's something we can all rally rally up for next year. So, any questions? Thank you. Oh, that's okay. Please stand and introduce yourself.
Okay,
Thank you.
do I need to face this way? So my name is Esther Bonyo. I'm a faculty member at Penn State University. My name is Esther Bonyo. I'm a faculty member at Penn State University. I traveled with the Global Council for Science and Environment. Thank you for, I had a couple of you mention repeatedly that there's this potential interface between passive and active cooling that is not being looked at. My own work looks at materials, biomaterials, and materials that can help with thermal buffer. And I just wanted to know, what do you think it would take? Because we've also had a lot of chat about that. This is something that has been known. I go to 2 different types of conferences, one to talk about the materials and then another one to talk about the energy, and actually the third one to talk about the climate. What really needs to happen to bring these different networks of professionals who have the knowledge and the expertise together in one place? Many of the ones who do embodied carbon research and development are not here. Yeah, what needs to happen differently to make sure that come COP28, we've gone beyond the chatting, and we now have examples that are showing how we are bringing the best science that exists on how to work with locally available materials that are very low carbon to reduce the cooling loads and the heating loads. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic question. Kasi, would you? That's okay. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, I've got a really geeky answer, and then I've probably got one that's like more policy, and then I'll hand over. So my geeky technical answer is, so for most emissions inventories, as far as I'm aware, the main drivers for projecting our emissions into the future for cities are growth, population growth, and GDP. So they're the main drivers that are kind of overlaid, and then our emissions inventories are kind of set against those. I think it would be really good if we also overlaid the climate change scenarios against those 2 other factors, because I think it would actually show us that the cooling demand and the cooling peak is coming much sooner in most cities than actually we're already doing it. So I think there's a data gap. Sorry for my slightly technical answer. I think that's one. And I also slightly disagree. I think that embodied emissions are coming in. I mean, if you look around this pavilion, for example, I think, this is really where we're seeing the BuildingsPavilion at COP talking about life cycle emissions much more than they have done before, and the kind of built environment community. So I think it's coming in. I think it is hard. I think there's still data gaps. I think we're not seeing the same amount of policies across cities or governments that are really addressing embodied emissions. But I think that's coming. So it's my
Two thoughts. One, the procurement policy of jurisdictions, local government, state government. This is a policy change. It's a policy that says we're only going to use these kinds of materials. And so that's political leadership and good solid policy, and there's tons of evidence base. It's just about putting it in motion and finding the advocates, and we're probably all sitting right here, and so you can sign us up after the session. And secondly, beginning to show the performance of those materials, and I know there's data to show that. I wanted to share that we announced last week the Cool Capital Stack. We are in partnership with the Clean Cooling Collaborative and ClimateWorks and the Rockefeller Foundation and others to bring together a pipeline of projects that cool and protect people and communities. And so this is the interface of clean and passive cooling. These are technologies that cool. These are nature-based solutions. We have 7 cities and their projects. We have some other technologies that are letting people know at the playground level or the worksite level what the danger of the workers' health from heat and those conditions are. So we're just getting started. It's $750 million worth of projects, and so we're ready to have conversations with people who are interested with good projects or investors, and so want to put that on the table because that's another place where your materials and the interface of the passive and active come into play. Thank you.
Thanks for the microphone. We'll take one more question, please.
Hi there. It's Graham Abraham from the UK government, and I actually wanted to follow in on that last point. So tomorrow morning there is the buildings breakthrough mission being launched here, okay, in this room at 9 o'clock. Sorry, you can't hear me. A bit closer. So it's Graham Abraham from the UK government. So tomorrow morning there is 9 o'clock. There is the buildings breakthrough mission being launched here in this room. It's being led by France and the Moroccan governments, and there are 16 other countries involved in this. Buildings Breakthrough is about looking at how we can decarbonise the building sector, and it's got a hierarchy. And the first point of the hierarchy is reducing demand. Okay, so that's the bottom part of the hierarchy. So passive cooling is key. I would encourage you to come along tomorrow. Okay, fly the flag for cooling, and fly the flag for nature-based solutions in reducing demand. Okay, we need to try to make sure that buildings look at this area seriously, and it's the first port of call, not just synthetic passive cooling, but nature-based cooling solutions get adopted first. Thank you.
Thank you for that plug. And just to highlight that the Buildings Breakthrough was launched, it's going to be launched tomorrow. Tomorrow morning.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock
here.
And we have the challenge being launched at the SDG 7 Pavilion too. So good things happening around cooling, but we have to collaborate and rally behind it, because it's taken a year since COP26 to have a buildings breakthrough. So let's make it a success. Coming to the end, I've heard fantastic things. I work in cooling day by day, but sometimes you come here and get inspired, and you meet people who are doing the same things and actually living in a place where people can't afford funds. They can't afford these active systems that we're talking about. You see that every day. So it's been very inspiring to have this session. I'd like to summarize by thanking UNEP, the Rocky Mountain Institute, WWF, Mission Innovation, and WRI, among others, who are issuing a challenge to cities to scale up the use of nature-based solutions to cool vulnerable populations, deliver cleaner air, and lower emissions. So cities themselves are invited to take the pledge to increase or enhance the proportion of nature-based cooling solutions. And I'd like to request that the pledge doesn't remain in the PowerPoint presentation or in the launch tomorrow. All of us are champions to actually speak to our cities and ask them to take this pledge and be part of this challenge. So, finalizing, I'll see you all tomorrow morning at SE for All Pavilion. Thank you.
Building Breakthrough is going to be launched on Thursday, so not tomorrow, at 9 o'clock. And the challenge is being launched tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the SDG 7 Pavilion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fantastic for our calendars and programs. So we'll see you all tomorrow morning. Thank you very much. That's okay. We'll now have a break for 5 minutes.